Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Writer's Realm podcast, and thanks for joining us on the epic adventure we call writing. We're your hosts,
Holly Rebillard
and Bob Dado, and Austin may join us later, but we'll see what happens. And today we're going to talk about merging genres with Kerry Nietz. Hi, Kerry. How are you?
Hi. Nice to see you.
Yeah, thanks for being here. You're amazing. I've read your Amish Vampires in Space book, but please tell us about you and your work.
Sure. This is my first novel. It was published back in 2009, so I've been doing it for a while. About a book a year since then. Have over 1 million words in print, maybe over a dozen novels and some short stories, and there's a nonfiction book or two in there as well. I just love storytelling. I definitely lean towards science fiction. That's kind of my jam. And I was in the software industry for a number of years as well. I worked at Microsoft for a few years in there, and father of 3 children and husband, and I have 2 cats. So I kind of live in farm country now in Ohio. So
Okay.
Yep.
Nice. And then where can we find you?
www.nietz.com, Nietz.com will find me. I'm also on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram as well.
Nice. Okay. Well, talking about merging genres, one of your standout books, I'm not going to say it got you on the map, but it got me on your map, I guess.
Okay.
And that was your book, Amish Vampires in Space.
Yes.
And the cover is fantastic. And it's got so many questions, Amish, okay? Usually we think of Amish prairie romance, so we got that. And then there's vampires, which are, I would say, maybe an urban fantasy / horror, right?
Yes.
Or gothic fantasy. And then we have in space.
Right.
So it's science fiction. So
yes.
this
Absolutely science fiction. Yes.
So please tell us all about how did you come up with this whole
How did I get there?
bag? Yeah.
Yes, please.
Everybody asked that question. So back in the day, I was published by a company called March Lord Press, and the guy who was the publisher, when he would go to these writing conventions and conferences, all the other publishers were looking for Amish fiction, just like you mentioned, Amish romance, because that's a big genre. Most people don't know that, but it sells millions of books a year.
Yep.
And definitely made fortunes for some people. And of course, he was a sci-fi fantasy guy, so he would jokingly say the only Amish I'm looking for is if it's something like Amish Vampires in Space. That was like his catchphrase. And then one day to the authors, he sent this mock. He was kind of experimenting with doing his own cover art. He sent this mock cover of Amish Vampires in Space, which is actually in that book you held up. It's like in the second or third page. You can see that cover.
Okay.
And we were kind of joking about it, laughing about it, because as you look at it, you'll see there's a Amish man in a casket, and there's obviously a planet behind or in space somewhere.
Ah, here it is, Vain Pursuit.
Yes.
Wow.
So we were laughing about that, and I said, someone should write that book, because I think the cover, the title alone, with a good cover, would intrigue people.
Oh, yes.
And I didn't think it was me, because I'm more of a hard science fiction guy, and I was in the middle of finishing up another series. But then I got this idea about, okay, how would the Amish get into space and become vampires? And I started writing. I got like 30,000 words in, and I sent him emails like, hey, guess what I'm doing? And he said, okay, well, if it's any good, I'll publish it. So I went and finished it. It was about 130,000 words when I was done, and sent it to him. He liked it, and so he published it. So that's kind of the short part of the story. There's more that happened after that, but that's kind of how it came to be.
That's an incredible story.
Yeah.
I love that.
No, it has 2 sequels. There's actually Amish Zombies from Space and Amish Werewolves of Space. So,
Now, did you have a great time writing this, or?
Oh, yeah, and it took probably as much research as anything I've ever done, because even though I don't live that far from Amish country here, I don't know a lot about their customs and whatnot. So, I connected with a couple actual Amish romance writers too, and they gave me suggestions what books to read and whatnot. And so, yeah, there's a lot of research involved there. And then it was like the science part. Okay, how does this kind of work? Because I wanted sort of a hard science fiction reason for these vampires, and so kind of got into figuring that out, and then picked a character and started writing. Who was the main character, and started writing his story, and went from there. So
nice. I mean, I don't think this is spoiling anything, but who is the main character in this?
Well, in the first book, his name's Jebediah. He is an Amish fella, but he has a bit of a secret. There in this future, worlds have been terraformed to be Earth-like, and often the Amish are the first ones in because they don't need a lot of technology to survive.
Oh my gosh, that's brilliant!
Trees and some fields and farmland and livestock, and they're good to go. So that was kind of the setup. But he's got some secrets he knows, and he suspects some things are wrong about their planet, and so that kind of sets things in motion. But unfortunately, puts him on the outs with some of the people in his community. So
hey, we like conflict in our novels.
Yep. So there's all conflict. That's what I thought was interesting, especially the conflict of, okay, you have these non-aggressive Amish folks and very aggressive vampire folks, and how does that play out? At what point do you defend your family, for instance, or your community? So I thought that was interesting, conflict to explore. So
I think it's fascinating, and I love Jebediah. I love this. Yeah. Just hearing that immediately, it almost makes me think of, because some other genre mashing was Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter.
Yes.
So did you get any? So you talked about your research you had to do with Amish. You're a hard science fiction author, so you kind of already have that background going.
Yeah.
Were there any other books like maybe that one or what was the Jane Austen book? Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies.
Yes.
But did you? I don't remember if those came out after your book or before. But was there any other books that you kind of looked at?
Around the same time, maybe a little earlier. They weren't like a real inspiration by any means. It was just kind of nice that they're out there because you're not in a genre by yourself. But yeah, as far as Amish research, there's a really good book called Amish in Society by a guy named Hostetler, who was, I assume, Amish at one point. So that helped a lot. But yeah, it's interesting.
I have to think that's a challenge with cross genres, is finding, like, especially when you have a couple different things going on, like it's kind of like a niche, right? And so
for sure.
Finding other books or other authors that are also writing in that you can compare your work to is probably really difficult.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you're trying to stay away from like erotica as being, you don't want to be recommended in that group. It's not that at all. I mean, some people assume, and there is a little bit of romance in it, but it's more science fiction than anything. So
okay. Yeah, I mean, so we got these. This is quite the mashup, and I'm gonna say it was pretty successful.
Say that again.
I'm gonna say your book here, Amish Vampires in Space, was pretty successful.
Yeah, it definitely caught a lot of buzz. In fact, the cover got released early, and that alone generated tens of thousands of shares and stuff.
Oh, it's so great!
It was, like, ridiculous, and then it went on to get mentioned in like Library Journal and Publishers Weekly, and Dave Barry even mentioned it.
Wow!
Kind of quip about it, and then like probably the pinnacle was in about 6 months later. It got mentioned on the Tonight Show by Jimmy Fallon.
Oh my gosh!
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, that made it blow up. So, yeah, it was kind of an amazing thing, especially since at that point there'd been a couple of days where I'd the way it used to be when you published a print book, on Amazon, if you had to make changes to the galley, you had to actually take it out of print for a few days. So there were some typos that needed fixed, and it seemed like a good time because sales had sort of slowed, and I was in the middle of doing that, and it took me a better part of a week to get it done. And I think it was a Tuesday, I got it all squared away. It was back in print, and it was that night it got mentioned on the Tonight Show.
No way.
The timing, and again, it just blew up. Like I had just started paying attention to Twitter at the time, so I would search for Amish vampires in space, and it was incredible to watch. Kind of those words being spread around the globe. And I think I saw like 12 different languages. And a dozen countries. It was just. Even in Japanese, you'd see, the Japanese language and then Amish vampire space in the middle of it, because there probably is no sign for Amish and vampires, it was pretty cool. So,
God, that's incredible.
A lot of connections.
Yeah,
it was fun. Definitely a fun time.
Oh my gosh! How about anybody talk to you about like movie rights or anything like the film rights?
It's been optioned for a potential movie or series.
Oh my gosh.
It's a hard process, and then COVID kind of slowed things down too because of what not a lot was getting produced then. But yeah, there's someone still trying to shop it around. So
wow,
we'll see. Maybe.
That is so exciting. Now, I have a billion questions, but like. Because this is incredible. I mean...
Yeah, it was. It really was.
Yeah.
It's been an incredible thing. It's cool.
Yeah. And I feel like you're still riding this wave, right? Like, it hasn't really died down, necessarily.
Yeah, no. Just when I think it is dying down, there'll be somebody who have discovered it for the first time, and they'll mention it on some list, and then it'll blow up again. And
yeah.
It's kind of evergreen, really.
Okay. Well, I really hope it blows up again with this podcast. People are, because I mean, how would we search for this? You know what I'm saying? Like, we wouldn't. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I would never think. Well, let me go look for this crossover, cross merging genre thing.
It really is all like word of mouth. Or whatever.
Yeah.
People buy it, and read it, and like it.
Right. But on the other flip side of that same coin. I mean, anyone look for Amish, prairie romance, Amish romance, that's probably going to pop up somewhere.
Yeah, probably.
And then if we're searching for vampires, it's probably going to pop up again.
Yeah.
So
search terms. It's all about those search terms.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, the more you can put in it, the better the SEO is going to come back.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, here's like the latest. I don't know if you see.
Yeah, go ahead.
Like the latest.
Yeah, I remember seeing that one. Amish Werewolves of Space.
He has suspenders. They're kind of hard to see, but
he does.
That is so
cool. Well, they usually have. I could see where you steered away from the erotica stuff because usually the werewolf books, right? They'll have a bare-chested, hunk guy.
Right.
And you didn't want to pose for the,
no.
Probably just
No, the funny thing is in the Amish Vampires cover, the artist is actually the dead guy on the floor. So if you take a look at that, the guy who's on the floor is actually Kirk DuPont, and he's the artist.
Oh, Kirk DuPont did this.
So fun.
Yeah. He did all three of them.
Did he? Okay. Yeah, Kirk DuPont. We're going to have Kirk DuPont on here. He's a book cover artist. He does a lot of fantastic work.
Very talented. Years of just award-winning covers. So.
Yeah.
So when it comes to finding a balance between everything, what would be some advice that you would give to someone who's trying to get into like a multi-genre or trying to write for the first time in multi-genre? How do you find a good balance between each of them?
That's a good thing. That's a good question. My characters drive my story, so really it's a matter of finding the right characters and seeing where they go, I guess. I'm very much a intuitive writer, seat of the pants writer. So it's really more about, okay, I've got a couple ideas for different scenes and what I think the theme is here, and I sort of just follow the characters from there, So, I guess you just let the balance find itself. It's not a very good answer, maybe, but I don't know. I don't know how it works.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. That's something that I always say with my characters. So I like to plan out, kind of where I'm going, where I've come from, who the characters are, kind of at their core, and then when I get into each chapter, I just let the characters, I pants it and just let them go through the scene as they will, and just try and gently guide them when they get off track, as they inevitably do. So that makes complete sense to me. It's just kind of letting them take the direction and get you where you need to go.
Yeah, and I assume writing fantasy, you probably have multiple kind of main characters that you're following through the text, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I like to. Yeah, I like the variety, and I like to kind of bounce back and forth. And I usually try and keep it between 2 or 3 at the most.
Right. Well, that's like Amish vampires. They're really multiple main characters. There's Jebediah, and then there's a character named Seal, he's the captain of a futuristic sort of UPS ship, and who comes to pick them up, who comes to pick the Amish up. So he kind of has a more futuristic view, and so they kind of play against each other. And then there are a number of other pseudo main characters in there too that are kind of given their perspective. So the balance kind of came between them. So
I love that too, because I feel like it puts you in a position, one, to create some really good conflict, and two, it's so great for character building, because an Amish person might think that a vampire is a horrible person, right? That they're very, very bad. Whereas the vampire, when you see things from their point of view, they're like, no, this is just all I know.
Yeah.
I'm not doing this to be evil or vindictive or anything like that. It's just all that I know. And so it really transforms when you're jumping from one character to another and seeing how someone else views them versus how they view themselves. It really can change your perspective about things.
Right.
I think it's really helpful.
Right. Yeah, and then like for the Amish, it's like, okay, are these animals? Are these humans? How do I look at them? How do I look at their soul? Even whatever. So it's kind of an interesting conflict, I think. So.
Now I'm going to ask a weird, maybe uncomfortable question, maybe not, but was there any pushback in any of these, in the reader genres of Amish or vampires or science fiction?
Yeah, not really from the vampires so much. In fact, I got some really nice compliments from that side of it. And in fact, I think I had one guy send me an email once, and it was kind of filled with 4-letter words, but it was a huge compliment. Like, this is the greatest book ever, and like, okay, I'll take that, but on the romance side, definitely I think there were some of them that thought I was mocking maybe the genre or whatever. But my goal was always I want the Amish to be as real as possible, so so I really wasn't thinking about the Amish romance at all. But yeah, I even got a few who said I couldn't write Amish because I'm not Amish, which,
oh my gosh,
blew my mind, because no one's an Amish vampire.
That's perfect.
Like that, So, but in general, it was pretty good. And I found out later there were a couple Amish romance writers who were definitely fans behind the scenes. They didn't want to step out and say they loved it, but they kind of did. So
yeah,
because I would think, right, like, that's a great point about the gatekeeping that some people do with their genre. Like, like Amish, I've never written Amish. I do have a couple of. I met an author at a book conference, and I took a couple of his books, Prairie Romance, Amish Romance. He's very, very well known, very well read. So I just wanted to get a kind of feel. But most of these genres, when you put them out, there's like already kind of a framework involved, and a reader's going to pick it up and expect this is how the book is going to go, right?
Right.
So
right.
with
formula for sure, romance especially,
this has to happen, right? Like but like when you're mixed, so like we're talking about merging different genres, like how does that work? I mean, did you kind of have that in your head? Was it like, okay, this is how Amish go, or this is how vampires books go?
I definitely approached it again more from the science fiction perspective. So I was kind of following the tropes of more of like, The Thing or Alien or those type of things. Like, okay, how do those, what pattern do those sort of follow? And then again, but we're talking a different mix of people here. I mean, the funny thing about Amish romance is that it's sort of fantasy too. Like
Definitely.
they're not necessarily writing real Amish folks either. Because usually the layup is the setup is that there's some non-Amish person who's falling in love with someone in the Amish community, and that's a conflict, and then who's going to stay with who and whatever. Yeah. So those things happen, but it's not that common. So and it's often more pulling into the idyllic, farming community wherever their animals love us, and but it's not really like that in real life. There's good and bad. Like every society, there's good and bad, and so But from my perspective, I was mostly following the science fiction formulas more than anything.
Okay, like the science. I'm sorry, just real quick. Like this is obviously like horror, right? Like it's not a parody necessarily.
No. Yeah, it definitely has horror elements, in the way that a lot of science fiction does, but it's not real gory or anything to that extent. So
okay. Go ahead, Holly.
It always makes me laugh because when you're writing like a sci-fi or you're writing a fantasy that clearly doesn't take place in Earth or on Earth as we know it.
Yes.
But you still have to have some of those elements that people understand from our everyday life, right? So they can relate to the story. But then people are like, well, this can't possibly happen because, that timeline doesn't make sense with history. And it's like, well, yeah, but this is a made up world, right? Like It might be referencing something,
Right.
I think this comes back to something that we had talked about ages ago was coffee. And I had wanted to have coffee, some sort of coffee in one of my stories because I'm a huge coffee lover.
Sure.
Someone had said something like, you can't have coffee. They wouldn't have had coffee back then. And I'm like, back then.
Right. I guess they're assuming medieval times or something. That's funny.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like trying to find that balance that makes everybody happy, I think is very difficult and sometimes impossible, right? Because you're trying to ground it in reality in a certain time frame, but at the same time, there are sci-fi or fantastical elements that maybe have not come to fruition in real life yet.
Yeah.
So
yeah. One question I most often get is when people first hear the title, it's like, well, how would the Amish ever get into space? That is like a burning question, but if you know anything about the community, it's not that hard of a question to answer because they're fine with being taken places. Like if you go to the Amish community, many of them will work in factories where a bus will come and pick them up. So they're fine with that. So that's like that's the first easy question to answer. It's the other stuff, what happens with the vampires, Yeah, it's funny. What you said is it's a good point though, because it's like, well, there have been people who said, oh, the Amish would never do that. I was like, well, would they do it if they're on a spaceship? Because that's where they're at.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And it's just like, it's a book, man. Like it's
lighten up.
Lighten up. You read the title. Like, goodness gracious, you're gonna have questions, right? Of how they got into space. Are you serious right now? Did you not see the vampires part?
Yeah, right.
This is my tangent for the day, but so my wife and I are watching Dune 2 last night, and I'm very surprised. These are not her movies at all. She likes very realistic stuff. She loves documentaries, true life stuff. She loves those stuff. So Dune, obviously, complete fantasy space, and there's a point where some bad guys are getting attacked, and she's like, "Why would they park their ships right next to the mountain where the mountains are blowing up?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" It's like, that's so unrealistic. Why would the ships park? I'm like, "Wait a second, man! Like, this is the part you don't believe? To just see the giant sandworms running around here."
Right.
It's just so funny how people think,
Yeah. I know. One thing that I kind of took as a compliment was when I was in the middle of writing Amish werewolves. I got an email from a librarian in Shipshewana, Indiana, which, if you know anything about the area, that's like right in the middle of Amish country.
Okay.
And it was this very carefully worded email. It was like, some of my clients would like to know if you're going to finish that story with the, and with the Amish and the vampires. And I was like, well, you can tell them I'm working on it right now. But it was clear that, okay, the Amish are actually reading this book.
Yeah.
They're going to the library and getting this book and enjoying it. So that, makes me feel good. They've stuck around for a couple books and still enjoy it.
Yeah, I would feel if anyone has questions, they would be qualified to ask the questions about what in the world. But that's neat. Well, I know we don't usually talk about, this is usually a closing segment about what not to do. But was there anything while writing this book that you felt you should be wary of? And the overarching theme is just like if somebody's merging genres, like what should they watch out for, if you have anything?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is, no matter what the book is, be aware that someday it could have a much bigger audience than you ever expected. And so write accordingly, and write, do your best work no matter what it is, because you just never know. So
that's true. Yeah, big time. So you got werewolves in space. What was the second one?
Amish zombies.
Zombies. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Now you've got all this. You've written all three of these? Is there any other books where you kind of merge genres? So you're mostly hard science fiction. Did you mix in anything else?
Yes and no. One of my series centers around a future society under Sharia law. So it's kind of an Islamic society, but the main character is a high-tech guy that has an implant in his head that connects into their version of the internet. So it's kind of a little cyberpunk, but with a very different kind of society, one that you would think would be much more close to the idea, and so again, but it's still kind of a genre mix-up, because I figure out how to make that all work. Right. And but it ended up being like kind of one of my readers' favorite worlds for me to work in. So I've written a number there. It's called the Dark Trends trilogy, and then there's a separate series that follows a different main character. So yeah, and then another series I recently started working on is this one. I don't know if you can see it, but the main characters are spacefaring rats. So they're like alien rats. It's based in a gaming universe, but you really don't have to know much about the game to kind of enjoy the series. But they approached me about, hey, would you like to write a series of books with alien rats in space? And I was like, yeah, that's me. I'll do that.
Now,
it's been fun. It really, I don't know if you're familiar with the show Firefly, but it's kind of like Firefly, but with rats and
fun
and big monsters and other things. So it's fun. Okay.
Is that close to lit RPG then? The genre, or is it more science fiction?
I think you call it lit. Yeah, I don't think you call it lit RPG. It's really very, very much episodic science fiction.
Okay. And what were the titles for that for our listeners?
Yeah, the first one is called Rats, but it has the there's an H in there.
RHATS.
Yeah.
Rats.
And then the second one is Rats 2, as you see.
It's spelled T-O-O.
It's called Rats 3. So and if I do a fourth one, it'll probably be Rats More. I don't know.
Even more rats.
Funny like that, So,
yeah.
Fun stuff.
I think that has to be such a great, even for someone who's not looking to write a full novel, that has to be a great writing exercise, is to just take something like that is just so out of the box or so outrageous, and then make it work, right? Because that really gets those creative juices going. And I feel like obviously that's a trend that you have continued with throughout your whole career. But I think for anyone, that's probably a great exercise to just, if you can make that work, then you can make anything.
Yeah, I think that's another thing is don't be afraid to challenge yourself. A lot of writers are doing what everybody else is doing, but do something really unique, and you might be surprised with the results. And I feel that. I mean, for me, that invigorates me. Give me something that's a little different, and that I can make my own. That's awesome. And I think every writer should do that. This is an imaginative profession.
Yeah.
Dip into your imagination.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I mean, the market is changing, especially like with traditional publishing, the market is changing every year. And you look back a couple years ago and everyone in the fantasy world was talking about the fae and the fairies, and now it's all about the dragons. But if I sat down today and wrote a book about dragons, by the time that book was done and edited, and then I was ready to query it out, and then it went through, I mean, we're talking year and a half, 2 years maybe. And by then, no one's going to care about dragons. Again, it's going to be on to something new. So you have to just sit down and write and find that little market for yourself, and find something that you're good at writing that nobody else is doing. And that's really your best shot.
Yeah. The book will find its market. It'll find its readers.
There's readers. Yeah. No, that's a great point, Holly. And I kind of feel like that we're doing that with the books that we've written. My first book was Coil and Fang, Curse of Shadows, and I didn't know where to put that. I just wanted it to be fun, but then I realized because this is my very first book that I wrote completely and published. I was like, oh, it needs like a genre, like you have to put it somewhere, like in the bookshelf. Like somebody explained, if I were to walk into Barnes and Noble, I'm sorry, God, I cannot talk today. Barnes and Noble. Anyway, if I walked into the bookstore, like, where would I find your book? Like, and sometimes for us, that could be like, well, geez, it might be here or there. And I started with historical fiction, but I was like, the more I looked into historical fiction, I was like, yeah, no, this is definitely not historical fiction. So I had to mix it up with steampunk and fantasy. And steampunk is a subgenre of science fiction.
Yes.
So it's kind of but it was fun to me. I really didn't think about it, I wasn't, when I wrote it, I just wanted it to be fun. I didn't think, well, is this allowed? And I don't know if you felt that, Kerry, writing Amish Vampires in Space. Did you feel like, I don't know if this is going to work, or are people going to, I don't know if that was a thought process or not.
Yeah, it wasn't really. My goal was, okay, how can I make this work? Just how can I make this work? That was the challenge, and I think I succeeded. And now I did. One of my Amish romance reader, she was a writer, but she was reading it. She did tell me, like, about 2/3 of the way through, she was like, now this would stop your typical Amish romance reader, and it was, there's a section in the book where this Amish lady, who is now a vampire, is sort of vamping. It's not really explicit at all, but it's not spicy, but there's a little more heated. And she said, yeah, that'd be it. They'd be out. And I remember talking to my publisher about that, and he's like, well, that's not what we're writing anyway. It's just science fiction, and it's not bad, so we're keeping it. But and it was important to the plot, really, because again, the Amish needed to see, like, when their folks are becoming vampires, like, this is who is this person now? They're very different than the person we knew, and so it added to the drama. But yeah, like, for an Amish romance reader, they don't expect any kind of even showing the ankles. Maybe that's about it. So,
the sweat on her brow is like, oh goodness gracious, let me fan myself.
Yeah. It's really tame. So
I have to say, for our listeners, that is a key phrase that you said right there. Important to the plot.
Right.
Do not, and I cannot stress this enough, do not cut something out of your novel that is important to your plot just to suit a different genre. If it is crucial to your plot,
Yeah.
it doesn't need to go because you're never going to please everybody.
Yes.
And just, if there's no other way to rework it and you think that it's important, keep it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. The thing I come up with is if you can please about 70% of the readers, you've done your job. You're never gonna get 100%. You hopefully never see 20%, but if you can get 70 to 80, then that's good. You did what you're supposed to do. So.
Yep. I mean, I think no matter the writer, or no matter the author,
absolutely,
everyone gets 1-star reviews.
Yeah.
And that's part of the job because there's no way that you can please everybody. Sometimes people stumble across your book or they try it and it's not something they usually read, and there's a reason for that.
Right.
We wish that those people just bothered to not review us at all, but
right. Yeah,
it happens.
And you can't predict what kind of day they were having when they were reading. They might have had a bad day, just didn't click with them that day. Well, can't control that, so might as well not get worried about it.
Not at all.
So I usually tout, or we have other authors, say you need to write the book that you want to read. So was this true in this case, Kerry?
Yeah, for sure. I enjoy all my books. I don't often get to go back and read them, but when I do, I'm usually pleased with what I've done. You're your worst critic. You're gonna find things like, I could have done a little better, but generally it's the kind of story I'd like to read. Rats in space, absolutely. I'd like to see that as a series. So I like what I've read, what I've written.
Good. And I think that's where we can call it successful. That's where, hey, I wrote a book, I published it, I wrote the end, and I love it.
Yep.
And boom, let's do the next one.
Yep.
That could be a mark of success. Now going back to when this the gaming company proposed this idea of novelization of their rats, and you said, "Yep, that's me." So what was it about that that appealed to you?
I guess. There were very few boundaries on what I could write other than make it fun, and I guess just the idea of spacefaring rats is fun. I don't know, and it's very much an ensemble. So I get to play with the characters that have very different personalities, but yet they're rats. So I don't know. It's just seems fun to me. So.
Oh man. Now I just got the impression all of a sudden, and I wonder, and I'm just thinking for all of us authors, those are fun. Rats are fun. I mean, not to everyone. I mean, some people are, they don't want them creeping around the house.
No.
But just that idea of these rats are running around their spaceship with laser guns, and
it's fun.
It's fun. I think maybe that's part of the reason why we write. We want to tell these stories because it almost brings us back down to a kid level of what we find fun and intriguing, and
absolutely.
And that would definitely be for me in my case. I would love to watch, if I were a kid watching rats in space. If this program was on, if I was 8, 9, 10 years old, Amish vampire, I'm absolutely going to do whatever I can to stay up late to watch this.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that taps into the nature, or the kid's nature. But I think I'm delving too deep here. We don't need to do that. Sorry.
Okay.
But yeah, it definitely taps into something. Yeah, like you said, fun. I think that's definitely. In fact, I have a Funko of Pee Wee Herman, and he's holding the secret word of the day, which is fun. So, and it's right here in front of me.
Yes.
To make sure that that's what I'm doing when I'm writing.
Yeah. I don't know if you guys remember the Muppet Show or remember seeing the old Muppet Show. But remember, they used to have a segment that was pigs in space.
Oh my gosh, you're right.
Always fun, right? Link Hog Flob, and it was fun.
It was like a space opera, a soap opera in space, right?
The Enterprise, but with pigs. That's
fun. Yeah. Well, what are you working on now? Anything?
Yeah, I am. That series I mentioned before, the Dark Trench series. Like I said, there was a parallel series called the Dark Trench Shadow, and I had 2 books written already, and and published already. But the last time I was kind of in that world was like 2017, and readers started to ask if there was going to be more to finish off that main character's story. And so yeah, there probably is. And so I started writing. And this one kind of fooled me because it took me a while to write, and as I wrote, trying to find where the ending is, it kind of grew and grew and grew, and then it got to close to 170,000 words. So now I think it might actually be 2 books that I'll split, which is okay too, but it wasn't what I was expecting going in. So characters just have more to do and say.
Okay.
It happens. So I'm hoping, by summer to get those out. So
good.
Yeah.
So I have another cross merging genres question, and it's gone now. It was this idea with the Amish vampires, that was kind of proposed in a way, in a fun, joking way. But I would say for new authors, like when I was writing my book, I guess there's 2 ways you could go about this. You can write a science fiction fantasy, which George Lucas would call his Star Wars series.
Space opera.
Space opera.
Yeah.
But I don't know what would be better, to pick a couple of genres like out of a grab bag and just pull it out and go, let's see if these 2 can work together, or would it be more, I want to tell this story and it sounds crazy, but I don't know where it's going to fit and I'll figure it out later. Like, what do you think would be better, or if there is anything?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I like the most imaginative path to this. Whether it means taking 2 out of a grab bag or not. I'm all for challenging yourself and seeing if you make it work. And if you can't get 10,000 words in it, then try something else. But yeah, whatever inspires your creativity the most and challenges you the most, that's the way to go about it. That's my advice.
Nice.
For what it's worth.
No, it's worth a lot. Thank you.
I'm curious too, going back to my earlier question about the balance between the genres. Do you feel like you have to select a base genre? So I'm going to write sci-fi, and then that it's going to have fantasy elements, for example, or I'm going to write a fantasy and it's going to have romance elements to it. But do you feel like there has to be one genre that is like the base of the entire novel and you can just add in the rest as you go? Or does it not? Do you feel like it doesn't really matter?
I do think that you're right, that there should be kind of a base. Like for me, since science fiction was my love language or whatever, that was kind of the way I went. And thankfully, science fiction is broad enough that it will allow in all those other things, right? I mean, the show Firefly was basically a Western in space, right? And horror is often there too. So yeah, I think you do kind of have to have a driving genre, and it definitely makes it easier when you're trying to explain it to somebody too. It's like, well, it's Amish vampire in space, but it's basically science fiction. It's like a science fiction take on it, and then they get it. They're not going into it thinking about bonnets and sappy love songs. They're thinking, okay, I see what you're doing. So, yeah, because you do at the end of the day, you do have to pitch it to somebody along the way.
Yeah,
like I do a lot of like homeschooling conventions you're familiar with Realm Makers, and how they have a traveling bookstore, and I will meet up with them and have to pitch my own books to people, and it does help to have some easy characterizations of the book that you can give people. So.
Okay. And this book isn't Amish vampires. Isn't like, what's the lowest level that you would sell it to? Like 12-year-olds or higher? 15-year-olds?
I've always, even going back to March Lord, they always said 13 up. The Amish vampires, you can read it. It depends on the kid. I mean, there's nothing in there that's worse than PG-13 for sure, and it's more like a PG or less.
Right.
The Rats books skew a little younger, just because the kids seem to be attracted to that, and I kind of wrote with that in mind. And then I have a book called Lost Bits that follows this sort of menagerie of robots, and that definitely skews a little younger too, kind of 11-ish. So,
Right.
yeah, I generally target for 13 and up, and
Okay.
some will go a little younger.
Okay. That's good. Yeah, because I was just thinking right now, I wonder if, like, I didn't do this, but I wonder if there are writers that have their guardrails up, like you said, 13 and up, so nothing too crazy spicy.
Yeah.
And then it has to have this, a little bit of romance. I don't know. Like, there's all kinds of, like, maybe guardrails they put up for themselves, and they go, okay, now I can write a story within these bumper rails. But, like, I feel like, I don't know if you did that or...
Yeah, and I think I kind of do that naturally. I will tell you that my father will white out things that he doesn't like in a book. So I try not to write things that he'll white out later. And he has read. I mean, my dad's 85 now, and he's read everything I've ever written. So that's kind of a compliment too.
Yeah.
But yeah, so. He grew up in the 50s, so I kind of write to that level. So
okay, yeah. Because I think we could still be creative within that.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like, obviously you are.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've never had anyone say, I wish your book had more swearing or
right.
spice. That's not what they focus on.
Right.
So,
yeah. More swearing. You're hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking too, because you mentioned, you like a 12 or 13-year-old could read this, and that's what I say with my books. Like, can a kid read this? And I'm like, yeah, it doesn't have anything too bad. And then I remembered, oops, there's a part. Yeah. And this is like years later. I just realized this recently. I'm so stupid out of my own book. But there's a part there where, like, the protagonist is tied up to the bed and naked, and the guy is gonna murder her. I was like, oh crap! There's that, like, it's just the one part. It's just the one part, but it's not erotic at all.
Yeah, I mean, graphic. You're probably okay.
But now I got to remember that part of the pitch. Like, just FYI, there's a maybe I'll just skip over these couple of pages. I don't have to read that part. But
it's actually really funny. I think this was a conversation that came up in our writing group because when I first started writing my adult novel, it was I had a character who there was a lot of curse words in there, not like an excessive amount, but there was just every once in a while I would throw them in there. And I realized after we had kind of gone through it in the writing group and I had gone back and started editing this novel, I was like, I'm using these curse words as a way to avoid diving deeper into what that character is actually feeling. There's way better ways. And I'm like, once I sat there and thought about it, and I'm like, 95% of the time, people are not walking around using curse words this often, right? And it was really funny because then I actually, in my daily life, became aware of how little or how excessively somebody was actually using curse words. And so it made me really realize that I was kind of using that as a barrier. So I think there's definitely a time and a place for it in a novel, obviously depending on what age group you're writing for. But even in the adult novels, I just want to throw that out there that don't just rely on them, because if you're using them too often and it's not for a specific character who's specifically using them, it probably means that you're just not diving deep enough into that character.
Yeah. And I kind of feel like movies will fall down that way sometimes, like when, like in a PG-13 movie, they know they can use one F word, well, then they have to use it. You know what I mean? It's like, well, you didn't really have to use it,
Right.
You kind of fell out of place when you did. So,
yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, you guys are going to kick out of this. In my Dark Trench books, because these techno kind of eunuchs have this implant, it controls their behavior in some ways. So they can't really use curse words, but they've shortcutted it, and so they use author author names as their curse words. Like they will use like classic sci-fi authors, for instance, like Crichton or Bradbury will be like a curse word. So,
That's so
yeah,
fun.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So that's what we need to focus on is fun. And then I had another emerging genres question about characterization. Your character is Jebediah, and so you're going to lean heavily into the Amish side because he's Amish, right?
right.
So when we're merging these genres, I guess that's something to look at. Like there has to be a balance between
Yes.
you're balancing three different plates: Amish, vampires, and space, or science fiction, I should say.
Yeah.
And so, is that how we do it? Like the background is science fiction. We're on a ship, and then Jebediah, he's Amish, and so we just want to keep those like separate, but they're in the same sphere.
Well,
Is that how we do it?
and then like we were talking before, is I had a separate sort of main character who was in the more science fiction world, right? He's sort of the captain of the ship. So, that helps you get that perspective and also, bring that genre into play. He's going to be using gadgets that the Amish are going to have no idea what it is, but he can at least that way he can explain them to them and whatever. So it definitely helps to have, again, some main characters in each genre.
Okay.
And help merge it.
Okay.
Kind of tie it up, I guess.
Yeah. And then the world building, like how much, like I don't know, how much Amish stuff did you put in versus how much science fiction stuff versus how much vampire stuff?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's definitely it's a world where there's some genetic manipulation has gone on to adapt animals and whatnot to future worlds and obviously terraform worlds. So, that allows for a lot of latitude as to what is encountered and what the Amish are used to, and so that kind of just grew out of necessity.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. Yeah. Just what we need to know, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Man, we have a lot of questions for you. After I told Kerry, I said, "Was this more like a discussion? We're just talking about it. No, we're just asking you all the questions."
That's fine. It's all good. I'm enjoying this. This is fun.
You're used to that, I'm sure, though, because this is a crazy, amazing amalgam of genres.
Yeah.
But yeah, we hope other new writers want to try this, right? Because there's something called writing to market where you're writing werewolf shifters, you love writing or you love reading about it, so okay, I'm going to write it, but then you're going to be in those parameters, like we're talking about with Amish prairie romance. Like there's a structure in place, and readers expect this to happen, and like you had said, Kerry, like there's no. Where she had felt like your Amish readers would stop reading at this point because she unbuttoned the top button or something like that, but then there's where we can just sit. It sounds like you just sat down and started writing a story. It just had it these, so there's that way too.
Story is an important thing, right?
Yeah.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah. And I feel like I don't want to say this disparagingly with people that do write to market, but for those that kind of explore and push out the boundaries, those are kind of they can be breakout successful books.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Because I think back in the day, like there was no structured genres like there are now.
Right.
When Stephen King's writing, he just wanted to tell a story about this girl that was, beat up and made fun of, but she also had psychic powers, and it turned out to be Kerry. But he wasn't thinking like, okay, I want to write this a horror, so it has to have this and that.
Right. Yeah, just think about like series like The Hunger Games. What was really going on before that? That dystopian had kind of fallen by the wayside. There wasn't a lot of that sort of dystopian future fiction, and then then everybody was doing it, right? So you got to be that you want to be that person if you can be, when it
Yeah.
does something that no one else has
Right.
done.
Yeah. And even Harry Potter, that's another good one
Right.
because they didn't take it initially because they don't know where we're going to put this. Is this a kid's book?
Hmm.
Is this a fantasy book? Is it like, why do we don't have a place for this on the bookshelf?
Yeah.
So they have no idea what to do. But I would want to say, yeah, just write your story. Like, if it's fantastic, then go for it. Don't
Yeah. I
let.
think most people like to be, and yes, some people are expecting certain things from a book, but I think there's also a fair amount of us who like to be surprised as well. Like I
Yeah.
know there are definitely movies I've watched where I was like, wow, this is not what I expected, but this is the coolest thing ever, because it just took this sort of crazy twist. Like my wife and I watched the Ant-Man Quantumania last weekend for the first time. I had never seen it, and as soon as they got in the quantum world and it just became this like flat out fantasy, I'm like, oh, I don't know what this is, but this is the coolest thing ever now. I don't know what's going to happen, but I don't
Right.
care, because
Yeah.
look, there's a jellyfish man right there. So yeah, I think you got to do that. I mean, even with like things like Kong versus Godzilla, right? At some point, yeah, they're big, but then they kind of break out and they do things and like I don't know what to expect next, but it's great. Bring it on. Okay, they're under the world. They're inside the world now. That's awesome. I wasn't expecting that, but
Yeah.
so
It's fun.
I think we all like to be surprised.
Yeah. I like that. I think that's fantastic. Yeah. We definitely like to be surprised. And if we're surprised as the author, then we know it translates well.
Yeah,
Right
yeah.
on.
I think that happens to all of us a little bit too. I know I've definitely been surprised while writing. My first series, I didn't actually know who the main villain was until I got to the last book, and the main character walked in the room with him, and then I was like, "Oh, of course, this is who this is." But all along, I had no idea. So, yeah,
That's funny.
I like those surprises.
Hmm.
And you said you're a pantser, huh? When you write,
Yeah, I am.
that's fun. Yeah, this is definitely pantsy.
It's definitely probably a harder haul along the way.
It is.
Because you end up slow, but then when I get to the end, usually I don't spend a lot of time in revisions. It's okay, this works. So more time up front, but yeah, works out. Works out in the end. So
It works for us. It works
I'm
for us.
thankful. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so you're working on that. I just want to quickly go over what we're working on. So, Kerry, you talked about what you're working on. Go
Yeah,
back to
so
your
it's
trench coat, is it called?
it's the Dark Trench
Dark
Shadow
Trench.
series.
Okay.
The first book was called Frayed, and the second book was called Fraught, and then I've got two other books I'm working on now, I think.
Nice.
So two, maybe one, but probably two.
Okay.
So,
All science fiction, though.
yeah.
Nice. Okay. Holly, what are you working on?
I am still working on the Blood Sky. I'm so excited about it. I actually sat down last night and I just wrote, I think, what is my favorite chapter so far. I had to go back through and this is still my first draft, but I had to go back through and nix a couple chapters because the point of view just wasn't hitting the way I needed it to from the character I was writing it from. And so I went back and did that. And now like last night was my first night sitting down to write since I've made those changes. And I was just like, it was like a freaking switch had flipped and it just worked out perfectly. And I was so excited. It just really, really amped me up after writing last night because I was like, oh, finally, like I know that I'm back on track because it just made so much sense when I was writing it this time. So I was really excited about that. And then I'm also starting to frame out a new novel that I'm working on, which is more of a contemporary fantasy, which is something that I hate reading and I've never wanted to write about, but I have this idea.
I hate this. Anyway,
I hate it. I hate it so much. I've never really read one that I enjoyed. And so I just had this idea and I was like, it's got to be a contemporary fantasy. Like I just don't see it any other way. And so I'm kind of framing that out a little bit on the side to see how that works out. So
I mean, Holly, what is prompting you though? Like you don't like it, I mean, what the heck? But I've never seen this where you're like, oh, but I have my own book idea on this.
It's my characters. I started thinking about the story is about three women who are all kind of in their mid 30s to mid 40s, right? And that's a range that we don't really write about. And our characters aren't usually kind of in that with fantasy, right? And so I wanted to write about these three women and kind of things that we go through in that time frame, like a real character, but in a fantasy setting. And I was like thinking about one of the characters, and she's like, high level executive, way up there, powerful woman. And I was like, so that to me is like more contemporary, right? Because I'm not trying to go the angle of, medieval times where someone like that might be shaped as like a priestess or a queen or something like that, because I want modern day women to be able to relate to it, but still enjoy it in a fantasy setting. So that's kind of what's really pushing me towards it. And as I started framing out what these characters look like and then how their magic or their powers shape who they are, it just kept pushing me towards this contemporary fantasy.
Okay.
So I'm interested to see how that turns out.
Yeah. Well, you should.
see.
I mean, if it's in there, right? We gotta write it out if it's inside you. Right
Yeah.
on.
And what's the name of your published book? What is?
The published book is called Heartbound: The Cursed Fae, and it is a standalone novel, but in a way it can be used as a prequel to The Blood Sky.
Okay.
So kind of, and then that one, it's out there right now, and I got it out because I wanted it published on the anniversary of my mom's passing, because it's a book I wrote for her. And so I published it, and now my plan is this year, once The Blood Sky goes off to an editor, I'm going to also release a second edition of Heartbound, because there's a few things in it that I'd like to tweak, and some things that were missed in, like, editing mistakes and stuff like that. So I'm excited. So I got a lot going on this year.
That's exciting.
Yes. How about you, Bob? I know that you're not working on the story that I want you to work on, so tell us what you're working on.
The story you want me to work on would be the Barbarian Barista.
It sure would be.
Yeah. Which is an urban fantasy. Yeah, you're right. That's on the back burner. I'm having a really tough time with this Coil and Fang standalone short story called Death by Invitation Only. It's Coil and her partner Fang, which are Sherlock and Holmes pretty much. They get invited to a murder hotel where, they don't know it's a murder hotel, but it's actually based on the real story of H.H. Holmes in 1894 or 5, I can't remember which. He made this hotel where, and he would trap the guests and he would murder them. He would create little mazes for them. Yeah. So it's kind of based on that. I thought that would be a perfect fit for my characters, but I think I'm beating myself up to trying to make it too perfect. And it's not fun. It's difficult. So I need to go over, everything should be the same, but it's just the way it's happening is where I kind of get frustrated, and I can't figure this out. So anyway, that's what I'm working on. I need to get that done so that I can start working on Barbarian Barista, because I feel like that's an even more fun book, and I do
What's
have
the
fun
name
with that
of
one.
your last novel? What was the?
Mine, Coil and Fang, the last one, Eye of Eternity. There's it's number 4 in a series of 5 books. So, yeah, all 4 of my books are out. Coil and Fang are out available on Amazon. So please go buy 20 copies each. I'd appreciate that. That would, and talk to Jimmy Fallon about it if you can.
Yeah, well, maybe someday. Never know.
Never know,
I wasn't
man.
expecting it either. So.
Yeah.
In fact, I woke up that morning and a friend on Facebook messaged me and said, "How's it to be on the Tonight Show last night?" And I had no idea what she was talking about.
Yeah.
And then I did a search and was like, "Holy moly!" Yeah.
Your sales just blew up, huh?
Picked my book up and put it on the desk.
Wow.
It's crazy.
That's amazing. Good for you, man. All right, so closing segment. If you could have an hour with any author, who could it be and why? Uh, Anybody have any? Last time we did this, we did a few episodes back. I did Michael Crichton because he's one of my favorite authors, and he's amazing.
Yeah, I'd pick him. I think maybe Ray Bradbury. He wrote a lot and just had a lot of longevity and a lot of good ideas. So I think he would be a fun guy to talk to. He seemed to be very positive. People I know that have met him said he was just kind of an amazing person. So I would like to talk to him.
Yeah. Holly, you got anybody in mind?
Yeah. I think the last time we talked about this, I can't remember who I went with, but I'm going to go very modern this time, and probably very cliche, but they call her the Queen of Fantasy. She's a very popular author right now, or Queen of Romantasy, I guess, would be Sarah J. Maas. And the reason that I would select her, and I would think I would select her maybe 10 years ago, just because when she came up with the idea for her very first novel that made her so successful, it was the Throne of Glass series. And she wrote it when she was 16. And from the Throne of Glass series, she ended up coming up with, or the very first book she wrote, it was like a 130,000 word manuscript for a young adult fantasy. And out of that, she ended up pulling an entire storyline from that original novel and pulling it out of the Throne of Glass series. And from that, she created a whole other series, the Court of Thorns and Roses series. From how I understand it all happened. And I just think that's so fascinating. I would love to know how she was able to just take that's a whole chunk of your story and pull it out and still have that original story make sense and turn into, I think, like an 8-book or 7-book series, and then still create another huge series from that plot line. But I think that's just so fascinating. Like, you just to be able to build on the imagination and just take that little thread from one and not have it unravel the entire series, but then also be able to create something incredible out of it for another series. So I think that would be my choice, because I would just love to see the gears, the gears behind that,
Yeah, is that how she? Yeah, just let's invite her onto the show sometime.
Yeah,
I'll reach out to her. I'm sure she has an army of publicists to go through.
I'm sure.
We'll do this. We're gonna do this for you. I want to make this happen. For me, it would be Edgar Allan Poe. He was, I don't know. I don't know how he was, but when after I read Murders in the Rue Morgue, I was like, this guy's freaking brilliant. I mean, because it's a detective story, and I dare say I would have to do a little bit of research on this, but this may have been a precursor to Sherlock Holmes, where there's like kind of a detective that's not police, and he's kind of off to the side, and his character is Auguste Dupin, maybe. And he was kind of like he was like a what do you call it? He was like a Sherlock Holmes type, very brilliant, and he was rude. He wasn't. I mean, he kind of wanted to solve the murder, but he just felt like the police were inept and just dumb, and it's kind of Sherlock Holmes-ish. But anyway, I just wanted to talk to him about that, because how did you come up with this? It's the neatest thing to come up with, like a detective. I could be
wrong, but I think Edgar Allan Poe actually was a detective.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? You may be right, because I just watched a movie recently where he was.
Sure he was.
Yeah. So yeah, there you go. That'd be fantastic, just to talk to him about this. Like where he comes up with this stuff, and anyway, I hope he's not too weird though. But anyway, that'd be my pick, Edgar Allan Poe. All right. Well, there we go. Awesome. I think that's it.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Kerry. Where can we find you again?
Nietz.com, Nietz.com, and on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram.
Okay. And I'll have all these links in our when we publish this,
Awesome.
Which would be coming out. Oh, well, I shouldn't. Our listeners are it's going to be coming out the 20th. That doesn't make any sense for our listeners. They're like, I'm here right now. But we're not recording this before, so This is going to be available the 25th of this month. But yeah, we had a fantastic time. Kerry, thank you very much for sharing the insights.
Yes, thank you.
Fun to meet you both.
Yeah, you had some great stuff on merging genres and your own personal stories. I do like how your dad is whiting out stuff he doesn't like.
Yeah. Not my books, but there's other people's books.
Oh my gosh, I could just see him with Sandra J. Moss's books. Like, oh yeah, I need another bottle here. Yeah. Again, thank you. Be more than happy to have you on again, Kerry. So don't forget to subscribe to our channels at the links below so you don't miss any of the Writer's Realm content. We always love to hear from our listeners, so if you have a question or topic you want us to dive into, please get in touch. Until then, get back to writing. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.